Hi, my name is Barry Horner, and I'm your host on today's episode of Steak and Soul, the podcast that's dedicated to demystifying the world of employee ownership. Stake refers not just to the financial or beneficial ownership, but also to the vested interest, the sense of responsibility, and the feeling of belonging that comes with being an employee owner. Soul is all about company culture, the values, the shared purpose, and the human connection that are amplified and shaped by employee ownership. Soul is the company's silent language. Join us for Series 1 as we sit down with business leaders and CEOs who have successfully navigated their journey to employee ownership.
Today, we are joined by a man who has not only steered and led a century-old family business, but has recently made the boldest decision a founder can make to protect it. Nick Parsons is the fourth generation leader of Parsons Bakery, a Bristol-based bakery institution that has grown from a single shop in 1926 to a thriving 50-store network across the southwest. But the reason Nick is with us today goes way beyond their reputation for amazing sausage rolls and artisan sour bread. In April last year, as the business approached its 99th anniversary, Nick and his family chose to step back and hand over the keys to the people who made it happen. They transitioned 100% of the business into an employee ownership trust, overnight turning their 400 members into co-owners. So today we're going to talk about the stake, the ownership piece that now belongs to the frontline workers, and what it feels like to entrust a family name to the hands of the community, and also the culture, the soul of a 100-year-old brand. So Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Barry.
So I think a great place to start, I think you must be the only business we've certainly had on so far with a 100-year history. So what do you know about the history of the business in terms of grandparents and how it all started back in 1926? It's a fascinating story, I'm sure.
It actually started before 1926, but we couldn't decide on the actual date. So that was a date where something concrete we could hold on to. So we made that our start date. I believe it was actually 10 years before that at some point. My great grandparents started, mom and pop bakery shop in Clevedon.
Right.
They delivered door to door with a horse and cart, if you can believe it.
Wow.
And it came down through my family. My parents were running it through the 70s and 80s. They came into the 90s. They wanted to retire. They hadn't had a good last 10 years at it, so they didn't have adequate pension provision. So my brother was working in the bakery. I wasn't nothing to do with the business. I had no intention of going into the family business.
Right.
But me and my brother borrowed some money. We bought my parents out. They could retire, and then we set about expanding it. It wasn't really profitable to start. We were only just treading water. We just borrowed a little money, but I knew they were quite risky businesses. Food and drink businesses generally are quite risky. 60% of them don't make it past year 1, and 80% of food and drink businesses are gone by year 5. So I knew we had an uphill push to start with. I had no formal training, but my motivator was I had a point to prove. I flunked all my exams at school. Didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to Australia for a year. I ended up working in a bed shop, being a bed salesman, and I had quite an inspirational owner of that business who took me to side and taught me all about selling. And that inspired my interest in business. So I came back. My brother said, "Can you help?" So I jumped in, and the rest is history.
And what was your role, Nick, when you initially started? Presumably you had to sort of learn your craft and the whole skill of bakery.
I'll fess up straight away. I don't know how to make a loaf of bread or a sausage roll or anything. I don't know how to run a shop. So I think I realized quite quickly I didn't have any specific skills.
Right.
But I did have this point to prove that I knew I could do something, and I had the energy and the vision. So I just did whatever I could to start with. I think I just helped out a little bit here and there. I drove a van for a bit. I swept the floors, did absolutely anything I could just to try and learn how the business was operating. And then I thought, there's only one way to make this business succeed, and that's just to expand. I think treading water, particularly in food and drink businesses, is really challenging. So I foolishly opened a shop It didn't work so well for the first 12 months. And I thought, oh, gee, I'm going to fail in the first year. And then slowly I learned more and it got better and better. And then I opened another shop. And then we took a big step. We moved the bakery from a tiny little bakery behind the first shop to a football-sized pitched, like a warehouse, a giant warehouse. And we were just in the one quarter of it, with one oven and a couple of tables. Couldn't pay the rent, or borrowed too much money from the bank. But that was probably a good motivator. So I just started opening shops. Got quite good at it. Opened some bad ones, failed quite a few times along the way. So I really learned as I went. Just trusting my over-eager vision, I think.
And what was the point to prove? Was that you were wanting to prove a point, or were you wanting to prove something to your parents? What was the motivation there?
I think it's good. My teacher said I should have done better at school.
Right.
But I realised maybe I was a little bit different because I couldn't concentrate or connect to a teacher if they weren't inspiring. And when I did have one teacher that was really inspiring, I did really well. I kind of learned something there. Okay, I think taking orders from someone above me who I don't find inspirational is going to be a problem for me. So I kind of figured I was going to be self-employed at something. I think my parents have wrote me off because my brother was the baker in the family business. My sister had gone on, had a really successful career. So I was the odd one out of the family. So I think that was a good motivator. And then I also thought I had this weird visionary moment when I just traveled around all the cities and towns where I lived, around Bristol, and I just saw the high streets were dying. This is like late 90s. Internet shopping was kicking in. Shops were starting to close. And I just thought, bakeries they've just got a very emotional component to them. They're really built into the local communities. You have a lot of regular customers. So foolishly, I think I was on a mission to save the high streets as well. It sounds quite grand, but I think that was one of the motives. I thought, no, it's got to work. So I kind of reinvented our bakery, the way it presented itself and the goods we offered. So yeah, I think there's lots. And I talked to lots of other entrepreneurs. You think they're in it for the money, and often they're not. There's something else driving them. And it's usually personal, point to prove, or some statement to make.
Sure. So the business started with the horse and cart, and what size was it in terms of number of shops by the time you really took over? When you said you went through the expansion program, how many shops did you already have at that stage?
So one main shop with a bakery, and they had two, I wouldn't say full shops, but they had two very small branch shops. Those two weren't really profitable, and I think the main one just about supported the other two. So we started, I suppose, with 3 or 2.5 probably, and ended up with 50. And I didn't know I was going to end up with 50, but I think we could end up at 500 or 5,000. I think once you get it right, you can keep growing. But the things I weren't expecting on that journey were, I quite quickly realized that I can do it all by myself. So I just relied on attracting talented people to work for us. And some of the shops that I'd opened that weren't working very well, I thought I had everything right, but I realized it's just the people were wrong.
Right.
And that's a difficult decision. But I took that difficult decision and replaced them with people who were better suited to that job. And then the whole thing started to light up. And I realized, okay, it's a people business. We have 65,000 weekly customers.
Wow.
470 employees. So somehow, from a head office perspective, you have to connect all those people. So if someone's coming in making bread in the morning, it's got to make sure they've got the customer in mind. So it's going to be the best loaf of bread they can bake. And the store manager has to make sure the shop's clean and the service is good. And to connect all of those people all the time and keep everybody happy and motivated, I realized, okay, that's going to be the trick to the business. It's not just product; it's more people than product.
Yeah. And what's the thread, would you say, if your great grandparents were to walk into a shop today, is there a cultural thread that runs through the business from when it started to now in terms of something that they would identify to think, actually, yeah, that was so important to us at that time, and it's equally important now?
Yeah, I think it's people, isn't it? Just family businesses essentially start with a different remit, don't they? Because they have members of their family working for them, so they're working with people they care a lot about. So there's just this care culture that grows up. Even if you then employ people from outside your family, that culture is already in the building. So you end up treating everybody like family. And consequently, you end up getting to know the lives of your employees very well. They work really hard, tough jobs, sometimes very early in the morning or late at night. It's a really tough industry. So we have 80 people who've been with us more than 10 years. 40 people have been with us more than 5 years.
No.
And that's in an industry that has a really high churn rate for staff turnover. So that I'm really proud of that part.
Yeah.
We look after people and they connect to us and we connect to them, and it gives you a competitive edge.
Sure. So business is doing well. You've grown from 2 or 3 shops up to 50. What was the catalyst for you personally to think, actually, now is the right time to become employee owned? What was the thought process? And maybe just for those listening to the podcast, sort of guide us through the sort of thought processes, because it felt like, you're not old, the business is doing well. I guess you could have carried on, opened another 50 shops, happy days. What led to the pretty fundamental decision to go down the route of employee ownership?
There's 2 parts to that. The first part is my sister died unexpectedly. She was 57. This was 5 years ago. And that was a real wake-up call for me, just to see, wow, we're not here forever. If I die and leave a big hole in my business and I haven't made plans for it, it's going to be really difficult for those people I leave behind. So I felt a big responsibility to put some sort of succession plan in place. I also thought that was the first part. The second part is I built a senior management team. The business got so big, with so many moving parts. I was working 100 hours a week, and I thought this isn't going to do. So I started collecting really talented people, bring them in, build that team around me, and quite quickly realized that they were much better at it than me. We started doing really well, and that's a bit of a dent to your ego. It's a good learning step. Yeah. And then I saw all these things started to join up, and I thought, wow, here's my I haven't got a succession plan, but now I've got these really talented people in the business, and it's taking off, and it's doing even better. When I was trying to run everything, they're doing a much better job. They're in their 30s and 40s. They're younger than me, and they those 2 things, I just thought, this feels like a right time to build an exit strategy. And then I looked round at all the options. I'd already been involved in a trade purchase. I bought another smaller bakery in a neighbouring city. And wow, that was complicated. And you get a clash of 2 cultures bashing together. It's never easy, and much harder than I thought. And I thought, if I choose the trade sale route, another bakery possibly, or another business is going to come alongside me, buy me. The first thing they're going to do is chop out that management team or middle management, because they want to save on the synergies. They're going to get rid of all the people that I really care for and been with me for a long time and are doing really well. I know that our business wouldn't function as well because our team really know how to run it well. And I just can't do that. I don't want to do that. I'm going to explore some other options. And then a friend of mine owned an architectural practice in Bristol called Wilmore Isles, and they'd done an EA transaction 10 years ago. So I met up with him, and he was telling me all about it, all the ups and downs. And I came away thinking, that's definitely the best suited option for us. Before all that, I had dabbled in a private equity deal, which I was forced to do because we ran out of money, and I sold a chunk of the shares to some private equity guys. So I had a little look at that structure. That didn't go so well. There's a lot of rich, powerful guys sat in the boardroom with a different idea of how the business should be run. So I didn't want to go down the private equity route. Trade sale was out. Like I said, my friend had done a good EAT, so I thought, yeah, that's right for us.
You mentioned a moment ago, I think the expression you used was something like, I pulled together a collection of good people. Easy to say, but just what was the process there? How did you go about doing that? Because I think, again, for a lot of people running businesses, thinking about employee ownership in the future, you've got ownership transition, which is one thing. You've got leadership transition, and it seems like you've been doing both very intentionally and very deliberately and clearly. I'm not sure a lot of businesses think quite like that. So what was the process from thinking, actually, I've started to recruit people? How did that work? Where did you find good people? And have you taken on graduates and homegrown them? Or what's been the process of building the senior team around you that are now able to run a business of, a significant size?
We grow our own, it's the answer. We find people in our business that have got potential and probably promote them quicker than they're expecting. But with loads of support, they just performed amazingly well. We had some people join us from outside, but most of them we've grown, and most of them came from jobs right down on the ground floor and just developed quickly. Huge talent. I suppose, if anything, maybe one of my skills was talent spotting, which is seeing a young person, maybe a student that comes to work for us on a weekend when they're doing their A-levels, and then they decide they don't want to go to university, and then they become a full-time shop worker, and then an assistant manager, and then a manager, and then an area manager, and then they're in head office. And growing our people that way, they've got the culture built into them already by the time they get up into the head office room, and B, they just pick up a load of skills because they've experienced all different levels in the business. And then when they do get into a central management position, they've just got a different take on the business, because I've only seen it through the eyes of being a managing director or a leader or an owner. So they come up with a whole raft of ideas that they collected along the way of things they would improve if they were in the position to. So, yeah, homegrown talent has been a real win for us, and giving them the chance to perform often instills in them, they feel so glad that they've been unexpectedly promoted. They tend to overperform to prove, we're back to that point again, proving your worth. And they feel there's a sense of purpose, I think, when they've been given a real great opportunity. They feel they're not going to fail. They're going to deliver this, and they overperform and do a brilliant job. And before you know it, I built a team around me that were just much, much better than me.
And do you tend to do internal coaching, mentoring, or do you bring people in that help people that I can see as they've moved through from joining at a relatively early stage and then taking on some of the tasks that are required in running a business like yours? But not necessarily all of those skills are required sort of on-the-job training. How have you coached and mentored people into more senior roles? Is most of that being done just with your existing team?
Yeah, mostly it's personal. I spend a lot of time talking, not structured coaching sessions. Just my office door is always open. Come in, talk, tell me how your week's been, what's been good, what's been bad. We never criticize people for making mistakes or failing in any way, because I made so many mistakes as the business developed. It's just what can we learn from it? How can we not do it again? So I think that really open culture has been good for developing our people. I did have an outside business coach. I've always had some external help for myself, be it finance or management. And once I went to a session, once I sort of built this team around me, I was still figuring out how, for my role, is how to manage that team as senior managers, given they were better than me. So we went to a business coach, and with the team, we wanted to stand up and say what we did in the business, and everyone did a really good job. And they came to me, and I stood up and I couldn't really articulate what my role was. and they thought it was hilarious. And I honestly had no idea by then because I wasn't operational. I was
Right.
And what I didn't realise, which they all explained to me, is I'd gone from being a managing director to a leader. And I didn't know that. I didn't spot it, but apparently I was leading them somewhere. So they felt we were on a mission. Our job, Nick's got this vision, and our job is to deliver it for him. I never saw that. I missed that point, but.
Interesting. So what was the transition between you and Ben? Did you work the new, I don't know if you could call him MD or CEO, but the person essentially who took over from you. So how did that come about? And was he in the business before? And what did the handover process look like? Was he somebody that you'd got your eye on and thought, here we go, this is just such a natural next step? Just talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, it's back to talent spotting. Ben used to run really large, successful restaurants before he joined us. He was between jobs, and he applied for a part-time driver job we had. So he went from driving, and somebody else in our management team came upstairs on the second day that Ben was working for us. He said, "Have you seen that driver down there?" He said, "You're going to want to see him, Nick." And so I said, "Okay, bring him up." And it was really apparent he was a huge talent. And I wasn't going to let him just drive a van. So literally within a month, he was our retail director. And within 6 months, I knew he was going to be my replacement.
What did that person and you spot literally as soon as he'd walked through the door? Was it the leadership you've just talked about, that there was something so much more than someone who could just go and drive van around Bristol?
I think really good people bump into stuff or find things that they can improve. And hopefully they're confident enough to say, "Hey, we're doing it this way, but we could try it that way. And I can help."
Yeah.
And it's just that proactive, like me, he had a lot of self-belief. He didn't really know the bakery business like I didn't, but he knew a mistake or problem when he saw one, and he knew how to fix it. So again, we had that open culture where we just said, "Yeah, go for it. There's nothing wrong if it doesn't work, but let's try." And he started changing a few things, and the impact was, quite immediate. So it's given people, when you spot that talent, we could have kept him at any one level, but also if you don't give talented people opportunities, they go elsewhere to find them. So I guess my role was to find spaces that needed filling and search throughout the organisation to find the right people for them. And I think when you get really talented people, it's just obvious. It's like, okay, they're that good. I'm going to promote them absolutely as far as they can. And lots of people that I talk to said, "I can't believe I'd end up in an organisation this high up." They didn't have that personal aspiration, but given the opportunity, they stepped up.
Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? And a real privilege to be able to help people like that. Was there any examples of stuff that you said Ben just spotted stuff and sort of went and did it? Was there anything that immediately within a relatively short space of time of his joining that really made a big difference to the business? Was there an area or a skill set that perhaps he brought to the firm that, looking back, you think, well, yeah, I probably held that together, but that probably wasn't my forte?
It's really hard to pick one because he's
good
at everything. And
good all-rounder.
That was probably it, yeah. I think just...
And what was that, the handover period from him coming in to then ultimately you thinking, actually, here's my successor? What was that sort of conversation like, and handover periods and stuff like that?
It was a long time. As I said, my sister died 5 years before, so I gave myself 5 years to be out. And I already had the senior management team in place, but I just started promoting them really quick. Just said, "Right, you're going to take on a bigger and bigger remit. I'm standing back." And this is quite unusual, I understand now. But for the last 4 of those years, my desk was gone. I walked out of the building and said, "You guys run it. I'm going to come in. I work from home. Call me, email me. I'll come in once a week." So there's something about when you're building your succession plan, if you still put yourself in the center of it, it's really hard for those people around you to see what they're doing. And also it's hard to give it away for them because they go, "I shouldn't ask for it." You've got to actively give it away. So I just said, hey, Ben, I'm doing this. Would you be able to do that as well? And to the other team as well. And as I said earlier, when you give something away and they take it, dismantle it, put it back together, polish it, and it works better than you were doing it, there's not room for ego in business. The more humble you are, I think the better your business will develop.
Yeah.
And it was just quite easy. The more I gave it away, the better they did. So I stepped away. And I thought, I'll step away. I'm still here. I still own the business. If it goes wrong, I'll jump back in and help you out. But they also, removing yourself from a team bonds that team even tighter, If, oh my God, Nick's gone. Who do we ask if something goes wrong? Well, they don't. They figure it out for themselves. It bonds a team even tighter. So I quite quickly thought, yeah, they're going to be great, these guys. So then I thought, well, let's find the solution. I went out, found the EOT was going to be the transaction. And then it's just putting all those pieces together. And I told, in terms of communicating, I told the senior management team 18 months before the proposed transaction date. And then we told the wider team 6 months before the transaction. And that was an advice I'd been given. I had an advisor, Robert Postlethwaite from Postlethwaite, says they're EOT specialists.
Yeah.
And he said, don't tell your senior team quite early on, because they're going to have to do a lot of planning for it. But telling your wider team too early will probably lose their enthusiasm for 18 months. So condense that down to 6 months. So they're really excited and hyped, and comes quite quickly for them. Yeah, and it worked really well.
So we'll dig into the communication thing in a minute, because I think there's some really interesting stuff there. But I'm just thinking about you stepping back from this business that you've been running, intrinsically involved in. And for some people, there's a real sense of loss when people do that. There's a lot of sort of personal investment in a business, but I'm getting the impression that from a timing perspective, family perspective, that perhaps it hasn't been as significant for you. Because, certainly for me, I've got 3 boys, and someone said, does it feel a bit like handing over your 4th child? And again, I've lots of other outside interests. I don't think, as much as I love Paradigm Knot and I'm still involved in the business, it wasn't for me the be all and end all. I've got, had life outside work. What was it like for you handing over sort of the keys, maybe even 4 years before you became formally employee? And it feels like you'd already started to make that transition.
Yeah, I had. And I think if I'd been the smartest person in the room, it would have been difficult. But because I knew I wasn't the smartest person in the room, it felt much easier, I think. The people, other business owners I know, don't have that approach. So I think that's something that's quite rare. It's just having a great team and trusting them so much. They don't need me. I can step away. And was it difficult? It was a big adjustment. There's no doubt. It wasn't as big adjustment as actually the post-transaction adjustment.
Okay.
Talk about that as well separately, I suppose. But it was weird. I came home and I'd been used to just a lot of faces every day and people. I'd always spent one day a week out in my car driving around our stores, talking to the store teams, some of those 65,000 weekly customers. So I was super connected. If we launched a product and it didn't work, they told me, the staff told me, the customers told me. So we had a very short feedback loop. When I stepped away from the business, that loop, my connection to it disappeared. So I'd be ringing up at the start of saying, well, how's that new cake doing? And they'd give me an answer which wasn't really clear. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. And they didn't want to overpraise it or underpraise it. And that was an adjustment, having to turn off all my radar connections to the business and go, the only information I'm going to get is through the team. So I've got to get good at reading my team and listening to them, what they're telling me, what they're not telling me maybe, and see if I still need to help. And that was a different type of communication. And I definitely missed all the conversations and all the people. I've been around a really people-heavy business, and all of a sudden I was in my kitchen on my laptop working. that was a personal adjustment for me. I felt a loss of not connection, but just interaction. I definitely missed that. I got used to it. There's no problem with it. And I'd then start having the team over to my kitchen, just because if I went to see them in the office, we'd go into sort of boardroom atmosphere where they present and do a slideshow and all that sort of stuff. I didn't want that. I want to really know how they were.
Chat. Yeah.
So I started having them over to my kitchen for coffee once a week. And that went really well because they just took off their work clothes and just came in as colleagues and friends. So we'd just sit around and drink coffee and chat about work. And that really made me feel the connection again.
And have you felt the extra hours that you've created with other things? Are you starting to sort of explore, I don't know, working with charities or anything else, anything at the moment that sort of you're just finding interest in and just give you a different perspective, and maybe also an opportunity to meet people, perhaps, as you've said that's something you've missed.
Yeah, I am. And one of the business mentors I used said, you've got to replace it. You can't have all that input to you all the time from people and then just sit in a room on your own on a laptop. That's like solitary confinement. That's a punishment in prisons, So I started asking around a few people, and by accident, I guess they start saying, hey, I know this young entrepreneur who's struggling, or he's got one shop, he wants to open a second shop. So I just started not charging, but just doing mentoring for young entrepreneurs in Bristol. And that's really rewarding, just seeing yourself 20 years ago and having made all mistakes, but realizing they don't want someone to lecture at them. They're entrepreneurs, so they're going to do their own thing anyway. But just chatting to them, connecting to them, ask them questions, and often then they figure out the answer themselves because they're sat in front of somebody that's done it. Yeah. While they're talking to you, they figure out rather than you tell them the answer. Yeah. So that's been really, really rewarding. But I'm still looking for other opportunities to do outside work. The biggest adjustment post-transaction, I think, was wake up in the morning. Some days it felt great. There'd be blue sky, and we had, me and my wife, because my wife worked with me as well, we exited at the same time. We'd run some errands, go to the shops, buy some food, cook a nice meal in the evening, sit in the garden. It was great. And then other days, it'd be grey and rainy, and I check my phone, and there's no emails, there's no messages, no one's called me. And you sit there drumming your fingers on the desk sometimes thinking, oh, I wish I had more stuff coming at me, because that's what I've been used to. But I find a good balance. So I have one day a month for a boardroom meeting. And then one day a month, I go on the road with Ben and we visit the stores and stuff. That's nice. I get to interact with the customers again. So I'm finding my feet still. It's nearly a year.
Sure. Yeah.
But I definitely got some more holes to fill, I think.
Just jumping back into the communication conversation that we started. So you'd said that you told the senior management team, I think you said 12, 18 months beforehand, and then the main team. How did you go about working with the main 400 or whatever people? Because presumably, they're all in different stores all around predominantly the Southwest. What were those communications? And looking back, do you think you sort of got that about right? Did it land well in terms of when you first explained? Because it's a really interesting concept, employee ownership, I think, but it almost creates so many questions as, well, do I have a share certificate? Do I own an actual piece of the business? And then everybody goes online and starts to look at, there's a profit share. And how did you communicate some of those things where you literally physically presumably couldn't get everybody together, or did you? I'm not sure what you did. No.
Bakeries run 24/7 and they never stop. There's a lot of people in different places. So I don't know about you, but I was shocked. I thought they'd be popping champagne corks, put me on their shoulders and marching around the building. It wasn't like that at all. Right. We thought, okay, we're going to craft a memo out to everybody, just a simple memo, just saying, hey, this is what we're intending to do. And then we'll start getting groups of people together and meet with them to do face-to-face stuff. So I was expecting this big hooray to come back from the memo, and all that came up me was an avalanche of concerns and emails, and is our personal finances at risk? What happens if it goes bust? And it was just, I was really taken aback about how many concerns they had. I don't, was that the same for you? Did you find that or not?
Not so much. I mean, we did a series of cafes for the whole team, and then we saw some of the challenges, having spoken to a number of other employee-owned businesses. We transitioned in 2019, and one of the bits of advice we had was put a frequently asked questions document together. So we did spend quite a long time crafting the inevitable questions of, well, what does this mean for me? What does that mean for job security? But the other thing I'd carefully explained, I think, about 12 to 18 months before with the whole team, and we did have the benefit of getting everybody together, was most of them had never even thought that I'd at some point stand up and start to explain succession. It's like, it's just not in their day-to-day consciousness. They just get on with their jobs. They do it really well. So I said, these are some of the challenges, and these, we've got a couple of people who wanted to exit, and they were owners. I'd always believed in quite wide share ownership. So by the time we became employee-owned in 2019, we had about 20 different owners, and two of them got to the point of saying, I know it's a illiquid market, but actually, how are we going to realize value? But when we made the decision through a whole process of deciding to go down the route of employee ownership, I got everybody together, and I got the tax team to stand up, and there were about 10 people in the tax team. And I said, well, realistically, you'd have probably lost your jobs. Business services, so that's finance, compliance, all of those. If you get taken over by a large acquirer, as you said earlier, they're looking for efficiencies and synergies. Realistic. I mean, that would probably have left half the team. So actually, we presented it as it's not without its challenges, employee ownership, but it's the way we can keep this whole business intact. You can collectively run it. We separated ownership succession from leadership succession. And I said, I'm not going anywhere, which I think at that point was probably reassuring. And then we took them on another journey, which was, how do we find Barry's successor? So that's how it landed with our team. But, inevitably I always think you get some people who really love the idea, embrace it, and others who are, more perhaps on the more cautious side of things. And they'll always be, we really like this business. How much is it going to change with someone new at the helm? I think there's always those challenges. So
I should have done it that way. I think I did it when my memo went out, and I got a load of concerns come back in. We then did the frequently asked question documents, and which would have been easy. I think maybe all your people in the same place.
Predominantly at that time, most of the people were in the Bristol office. I
think ours was just an extra challenge because we couldn't go out and tell individually, because then one store would know before the next store, and we just wanted to tell everybody at the same time. So I guess we had different type of challenges. But then it's just a lot of face-to-face stuff. I think when I did it face-to-face, because they'd known, I've been running that business for 25 years. They knew me and trusted me. And like you, they didn't really want the owner to step back, because you're their security blanket in a way, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely.
But then explaining that Ben was, who they already knew and trusted, was going to take over from me, was a sense of relief. And then just reassuring them I think they were more worried about the risk. I think they just thought, oh my God, in some way, if we do something wrong, it's going to blow up on us and we're responsible. So just convincing that wasn't the way. And like you, I still stay involved. I'm a non-exec director, so I'm still going to be in the background. And then quite quickly they got it then. But it was just difficult, I think, just because of the geography.
Yeah. So you've made your decision, and presumably that was a family decision, was it? Was that a get the family together, or was that just more you and your wife thinking actually the time is right to make this change?
Me, my wife, and my brother. I guess I led it because I wanted to put a plan in place, but they backed me 100%. So there was no difficulty.
And how difficult? I think the market's much more mature these days than it was even when we became employee-owned in 2019. You became employee-owned in 2025. How difficult was it for you? I mean, you ended up with Robert, Postlethwaite, who's probably done as many EOTs as anyone in the UK. A wonderful firm with very, held in high regard. But was it a difficult journey for you in terms of finding professional advisors, or did you typically go back to your previous mate, who's the architect, who'd already gone through the process to get that sort of information?
Yeah, I asked him a little bit about the process. I didn't use the same advisors as him.
Right.
Our finance director had experience, was an accountant originally, and he had experience of some EETs. And
Right.
he knew Robert, so I got the introduction through him.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I already have our own lawyers, for both for the business and for us personally, and they had an EOT specialist. That was Jonathan Poole at Temple Brights in Bristol. So people I knew that had some experience. I think that's quite important. I think if you just picked advisors that didn't have experience in those fields, it would be more complicated. So that would be my first bit of advice. And then also people, you've got to get on with them and you've got to trust them. They shape the whole deal, the whole transaction is largely shaped by those people. And there are some complexities, with valuations.
Yeah.
And all. I think the difficult thing for me was trying to understand. I had several different hats to wear. So I was the vendor. I was selling the business. I was going to sell my shares. I had my lawyer. Then we had the lawyer representing the employees and the trust, Robert Postlethwaite. Then my brother had his own lawyer as well. So we had 3 lawyers. Then we had a valuation firm do the valuation, a lot of due diligence. There's a lot of digging into the background. And talking to all of them, you have to put on a different hat, because Robert was the initial advisor and the guy that structured the deal, but then he had to step away because he's representing the employees and the trust. So then we have to have distance between us. And then, so my lawyer and him have to negotiate. And it's quite tricky to wear those different hats, but it's a process. They know, we trust these people. They've done the process before. They know they've got to get through. But I'm surprised how deep, it's a big administrative task. It went on for, we were running it very loosely. We had it structured a couple of years before, and the last 6 months were intense. If I hadn't, I guess this is something I learned afterwards, if I hadn't stepped away from my role running the business, it would have been very difficult to then
trying to do everything.
Run EOT alongside that. So without knowing, I'd step back, and the team of running this business allowed me to devote all my time to the employee-owned transaction. I learned that along the way.
How is the governance? And I completely agree in terms of the nuances of EO. In some respects, I guess it's easier as a transaction because you've got 2 very willing parties rather than a trade sale, which can be more combative. But at the same time, the number of things you've got to get right, it does go to making sure you have got someone like Robert or a real expert acting in the business. It's interesting that you've got 3 law firms all working together, protecting each other's different interests, because historically, I don't sense that's been how most EO transactions have done. You've typically have one law firm essentially working for the buyer and the seller. It'll be interesting to see how that develops over time as the legislation and the sort of tax rules have become more nuanced and sophisticated. So you got to the point of becoming employee-owned. How has your governance structure changed as a result of that? Presumably you've now got the trust board and you sit on that, and Ben presumably runs the sort of exco day-to-day. What's the sort of structure within the business, and do you have like a partner voice or a forum where those working in the shops have the opportunity, as it's now they're beneficial owners in the business? How do they push forward their ideas if they see things in shops, think, or maybe that's always been the culture? Is there a formal way that gets fed into the sort of back to Ben and the team? Yeah,
that's really important. Those communication lines to all those different interested parties is really important. We've always had that feedback loop I was talking about. We've always been super tight.
Right.
We always give managers time to come into the head office and tell us what it's like, what's working, what's not working. So we've always had a really open communication culture in the business, and that still exists today. Even more so now, it's an employee-owned business. And we selected a trust of people of different skills that were connected or knew the business well. We have an independent who's an accountant that knew the business. My wife sits on the board, the trustees. We have one employee and we have Ben. So different levels of different types of people. And they're good. The thing about trust is they're both close, but they're also impartial as well. So that's a new piece of culture we'd never had before. So you have to work at that to make sure they've got some clout. They've got a job to do.
Yeah.
And they do hold you accountable, which is quite tricky for a senior management team that are not used to being held to account and used to actively operating the business. So the senior management team had to adjust that there's this other party alongside that they had to take into account. But I think it works really well. I think that going back to people, if you select the right people and you have the right communication channels open, it tended to take care of itself, that part. So yeah, I'm really happy about that. I think it works well. I can't think of anything ways we can improve it. Feedback's good. The good and bad feedback is good.
Yeah. How often does the trust board meet? Is that a quarterly?
Yeah, once a quarter.
Yeah. And does that tend to meet after Ben's board sort of, what's the sort of cadence of meetings, making sure that if there's something that needs to be ratified by the board, they haven't got, oh my goodness, it's not 2 months for a trust board meeting. Have you got the sort of decision process relatively aligned in terms of making sure that happens?
Yeah, every third board meeting, it then triggers a trust meeting.
Right.
And although Ben is the managing director and close colleague, and Nick and my wife that worked in the business with me, but those two are both trustees. They both won't give anything away. They're really clever. I'm always trying to warm them up, going, "How did it go, that trust meeting?" And they're like, "Oh, wouldn't you like to know?" So we're good. That's a really healthy culture, I think. That it's sometimes bizarre that they trust. They've got difficult jobs because they're working within the business and in the trust, two different roles. So they have different hats to wear. And they do that very well. And to start with, I didn't like the idea of a trust telling us what we could or couldn't do. And then I realized actually they were just like another pair of eyes, just making sure, I guess, holding us to account and making sure all our actions were based on our employees' interest and not just our management team's interest.
Yeah.
And that's good. Yeah. That's made our management team think about the business deeper, and on different levels. So there's definitely been a culture shift since we became employee owned. When I ran it, it was just what's healthy for this organization, what's going to propel us forward and grow the business. And we had some real ups and downs in that business. We nearly went bust 4 times in my career. Well, I'll tell you about that later. But the benefit of doing that when you have a small team is you're just very sharp and connected and you can action stuff really quick. I guess now we've had developers like, wow, when we see stuff like that coming along, it's like, well, we've got to inform the trust and we're just more open than we probably used to be,
Yeah. And getting the final point on getting ideas through from the teams, the beneficial owners across the 50 stores, have you implemented anything on that as yet in terms of feeding stuff either up to the trust board or to Ben in terms of why are we doing it this way? We could improve this process, or the whole thing of encouraging people to think like owners is an interesting one as to how you encourage people to do that. Has there been any formal way that you've sought to promote that?
Not really. I think the openness we had in our culture meant we were always listening to our team. If the bread oven wasn't working properly, we didn't have to go in there and spot it. They'd come to us and say, something's wrong with the oven. You guys need to get a technician out to sort it out. And so we always had this. It was a really flat organization. We're very close. And the top team are very close to the frontline troops. It's really close. So I don't think and I know that's unusual. Again, other business owners I know don't have that closeness. So I don't think we had to create a new openness culture. I think it was there.
It was there anyway. Yeah.
If anything, it probably made them feel more empowered to bring up points of view. And Ben has sessions with them as well. They are a bit more formal for feedback.
Yeah.
And that's a skill in itself, because when you've got 470 people, you've got 470 different points of view. So you kind of got to let them be heard and listen to them. But at some point, the top team then say, well, we need to narrow down all that feedback into what is actionable and action that. So yeah, I think being an open culture was a really big help for us without realizing it.
Yeah, it's a common question that I think is sometimes asked of employee-owned businesses. How different does it feel now that you're employee-owned? But I guess the very nature of a business that would go down the route of employee ownership, and I would say Paradigm Norton's exactly that business, is very, my style's always been open and collegiate. We've always encouraged people, if you've got an idea, it doesn't require us to be employee owned to do that. People would just naturally do that anyway and go, I know we've done this for a while, but why are we doing it? Question, that constant questioning. So that makes complete sense, what you've said. In terms of the one change that I guess does come along with employee ownership, where they are the beneficial owners of the business, is a higher level of transparency of how we're doing. Now, again, there are some businesses that have done sort of full P&L, full everything. I think we've probably upped in terms of what we now share with the team, so they get the full P&L, revenue, gross profit, net margin, cash balances, high cash, low cash. We do, because we're a financial planning business, we've got a sort of 10-year projection. We're on a quest to try and improve our margins. So we have a conversation with the team on how they do that. What's the process in terms of information shared with them so that they genuinely can feel like owners in the business? Do you have a process for doing that?
We're definitely not as open as you guys.
Right.
I guess probably because it's a very competitive industry.
They
And I guess we've been a little bit cautious about information or data leaking.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense.
So, but they get a sense of whether we're doing well or not. They definitely get. I think what we do now is, before we just put the prices up, and our staff in the shops would then have to face a barrage of customer feedback, or not always positive, when the price goes up. So I think now we take more time to explain why the prices are going up. There's been a minimum wage change, or just the input costs have grown, and explain more about the reasons about our actions, rather than the technical details about the numbers. We explain the reasoning more than we ever did in the past. Right,
with you, yeah. In terms of, I was just reflecting as you've been talking about Ben and the leadership team you've built. And on a number of occasions, you said, they were so unbelievably able, which really enabled you to hand over the reins, perhaps in a way that might not have been the case. How have the senior team accepted it? We talked a little bit about the beneficiaries and the role that they have in the shops, but in terms of the senior team, are there any things that either real positives or not so good negatives, challenges that they've experienced as a result of becoming employee owned?
Yeah. They've stepped up amazingly well. They've developed since the EOT came about. Maybe out of a sense of responsibility, maybe because I'm totally removed from day-to-day operations. So I don't think they can probably see it in themselves, but I see it from a distance. They've developed remarkably well. I think that rubs off because of our open culture. That sense of responsibility gets passed down, and if I go out with Ben on the road now and we'll be in a shop and he'll see something he doesn't like and he'll just pull the manager aside and say, hey, I know it's annoying, but that glass is really smudgy on the display counter. Can you give it a wipe? And it is, that's how close we are. That's from managing director to maybe a part-time sales staff. It's that direct. And so I think everybody has benefited from it, but especially the senior management team. They've stepped up. They've developed the team much better than I could have done. And I think there's a personal... I never put a sense of responsibility upon them, but I think they've just taken it on themselves. I think that's what happens, isn't it? When you pass the crown over.
Yeah.
people step up to that space you left behind.
Yeah,
And it's really nice.
sure.
And it's nice knowing that the culture that I had probably inadvertently created over all those years, it's sort of stuck. And the cultures get
Yeah,
stuck in the building, I think, once
yeah,
they're
yeah,
there.
yeah,
And having taken over another business that didn't have that culture, I thought, great, we'll just absorb them and they'll enjoy all our nice new open culture. And they didn't, because it was change. And then it's just a different culture.
yeah,
And that was very nearly a disaster, that takeover. We managed to sabotage it, but it took a long time to communicate. Someone from business A to business B, they got to give up their old culture and come and join your new culture. And I think we learned from that was just communicating. I never really talked about our culture before. It was just in the building. It was the values, I guess, I had personally started it.
yeah,
Or my parents or my great grandparents, it was still in the building. But I think what we're taking time to do now is talk about that more. That there is a sense of purpose. We've got a sense of community. We've got all these customers that come and visit us all the time, several times a week. They share their lives with us. We learned during COVID that people were petrified and they stayed in their homes. We got permission to trade because we were an essential food business. And I said to all the team, you don't have to come in. I understand a lot of people are scared by this.
yeah,
They had the plastic protection screens up above. Before the supermarkets did, it was just day one we put them up because we thought we'd probably have to trade at some point because we're going to run out of cash. And this was really telling. I said, don't come in if you don't want to, but let's have our hands up. And 98% of the team put their hands up saying, yeah, we want to come in. And that's quite a moment, I thought. I learned a lot. That's culture and commitment and a sense of responsibility and sense of purpose. And we never used to talk about them. But I think from that I learned, okay, yeah, they're embedded in the business. And being employee owned has just brought them out and people talk about them more. Well, I never used to talk about them. Probably I did that, was my mistake, but they talk about it. It is special to work there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is that do you have that kind of, do you talk about your culture?
Yeah, I often refer to culture as the silent language that runs through a business because it's really difficult to touch it, but you know it. And certainly, interestingly, you were talking about your acquisition. We've done 9 on our journey, and the thing I massively invested in was time before we even got to doing the transaction.
Yeah.
So I always took the view that we could. If they were running on a different IT system, that was really no big deal. But culturally, if we weren't aligned, so I would say for the 9 that we've did, I would have a 18 to 24 month conversation with the vendors. And it was much more about culture than it was about money or IT systems. And I always remember one conversation I had with, we bought a business called the Red House in 2017, and I once had a call. We weren't at completion. We were sort of heading into that, and I had a call from Ruth, who was the CEO of that business, to say, "Can we get together?" And I thought, "Oh, here we go. What on earth is this about?" And interestingly, it was a culture conversation because the Red House team dressed casually, and the Paradigm team was suited and booted, and it was like, what's going to happen when we get together? And we've worked it through. And actually, as you can probably see today, we went with what the Red House did. And I guess, we then went into a period of lockdown and everything changed anyway. But it was working through those, what you would call a culture conversation, that meant that actually, having done 9, they've all been pretty successful. We didn't lose people that we wanted to lose. The businesses that they brought in has now been sort of subsumed within Paradigm Norton, but a number of the team that have come through acquisitions are here today, 15 years later. So, but it's that culture conversation that I think is so important to get these things right.
Yeah, that trust. Next time I'll do what you did. It's 24 months before, but it didn't help when we bought this business. I'd been negotiating with the owner and we'd agreed a price, and they had 8 shops. We bought all new equipment, stored in a warehouse, ready to go, like 400k worth of plant equipment that's going to go into these new shops. And then I was at the lawyer's office ready to sign the deal, and I got a phone call from him saying, "I've just put the business into administration. I didn't want to go through with it. I'd spent all this money. The
Oh
business
my
closed
goodness.
doors, which is not something you do in a bakery business ever. And I spent 48 hours with no sleep negotiating with the administrator to try and salvage it. We did manage to salvage it. We got the stores back open, but the other owner had broken the trust with his employees, so they're not going to trust a new guy coming in promising the world in this great culture. So I learned from that was just the trust. So important to have your team to trust you and you trust them. And let's say it's a silent language, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what quietly and silently bonds you all together is a mutual trust.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, definitely.
And having experienced that transaction without trust on the other side really brought it home. It's just so important.
Yeah. I might try and get Ben, if he will come on my podcast, because I'd love to get the other side of a little bit the other side of the story. But one thing I often find with those that are taking over from employee-owned business is there's some challenges around the cash flow of the business, because now Ben's got to build a business, possibly expand more shops, might have to invest in new capital equipment. I don't know what you're doing on a profit share at the moment, whether you're paying a profit share or not. He's got to pay out deferred consideration. There's a lot for the new CEO, MD to take on. How's that working in your business? Do you have any advice for businesses that are going down the employee-owned route in terms of how you best structure those things? Just seeing quite a lot of queries come through on paying out DC at the moment, because it's we're in a much more challenging economic situation than perhaps has been in the past. How do you grapple with all of these things? There's a lot for someone like Ben to think through. Any just sort of wisdom on that whole area?
Yeah, well, having nearly gone bust 4 times, running out of cash, I knew that cash flow was critical for our business. It's hard to build up big cash piles. It's just a cash-intensive business. The equipment's always breaking and the shops always need refurbishing, and we just use our cash all the time.
Right.
But we did. One of my thoughts is, if I hand this business over and they haven't got a great cash reserve, and then they go immediately into a difficult period, which happens sometimes, they're just going to be up against it instantly, and it's going to sour the whole deal. Even though I've got my day one cash out, I'm going to jeopardize my deferred consideration over the coming years. So I spent a lot of time preparing that. We left £1 million of working capital in the business, which gave them a good buffer. We did lots of long-term cash flow projections. We really sort of stress test it before we got to the deal. We've got really early warning signs built in, which I didn't have probably enough of when I was running it. So I just wanted to hand it over in the best possible shape to give it the best chance. Because what I don't want to be doing in year 2 is sat in that boardroom when they're saying, "Oh, cash is tight. We don't think we can pay your cash out." And I just didn't want to be in that position. I just thought I'm going to invest everything I can to help them succeed. And although I only get to do it one day a month in the boardroom and one day with Ben, it's still close enough that we trust each other.
Yeah.
And we've both got very different roles. He's got to make that business thrive and deliver for 470 people and pay money to me as well. He's got a difficult job. I never had to do that job. So I just see my role as a support role is how I can help him. Maybe if I spot early warning signs that they don't, we talk about them and share them. It's very rare I do that, but I am there as that second pair of eyes for them. So there's no doubt there's risk. Employee-owned transactions sound like they're going to be really soft, don't they? Because it's great. You've already got your people. Get some money out, no problem. But there's risk in every transaction you ever do.
Yeah.
I think it's far less risk than private equity, trade sales. So I think there's some comfort in that, but there's still risk. And I said to Ben, what I'm not going to do, which I've had all my life, is I had to take on debt to fund the business growth. Again, another reason why I nearly went bust quite often. I don't want you to do what I did, which is be up to your ears in debt, because the margin for error is so tight. So we got the business between the pair of us. We got the business functioning really well and had a strong cash flow that now they can just self-fund their expansion and development. And I think that depressurized the situation for Ben and the team.
Yeah. You've sound like you've done a lot of thinking and forward planning, because the way you've articulated the payment of the DC over a period of time and stress testing that is actually a credit to what you've done, because I don't think there's necessarily that level of rigor in my own personal observations of seeing some EO businesses, just in terms of the queries I see coming through into the EO community about, we had planned to pay it off over 7 and it now looks like it's going to be 15 or whatever. It's like, oh, that'll be an interesting journey for the business and for the vendors. And as you say, the risk potentially involved in that. That's really interesting. How do you measure the success of the employee-owned business? And again, maybe that's more of a question for Ben, but in terms of, are you mainly just looking at the metrics that you've always looked at, which are, revenue, gross margin, net margin, profit, or have you pivoted in any way and looking at sort of engagement of your team and looking for increase in that? Are there any changes in terms of, trying to work out, is this EOT thing working? And do you have any metrics around that you could share, or insights around, how you measure the effectiveness of an EOT transaction?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, I have the board pack each month, so I see all the financials.
Yeah.
So I've got a good read on how the business is performing. But I think just still being connected to the business, still going out once a month and speaking to the teams.
Yeah.
If they're not backward and coming forward.
Sure.
So I guess that is a metric, how they're feeling. If they're happy, I tell you what, there's a big turnover of staff in food and drink businesses. When we get it wrong at the top, the turnover of people increases. And that's really expensive for us. I'm 470.
When you say at the top, that's a branch manager.
Well, just any management, rather than just operations. Right. Once you get into management, if we do anything wrong in those management teams, the vast majority of people which are in operations start to leave because they don't like it and they're not treated the way they expect to be treated in our business. So I guess that's an informal metric that if we're losing talented people all the time, that's a red flag. You might not see it in the numbers to start with, but you will in 6 months' time when all the talent's walked out the door. Yeah. So I think just keeping your ear to the ground, making sure our talent are happy and well motivated is probably the best metric in our business that you can have.
Are there any ways that you do that? So we do a partner survey. We call them partners because that's just the language we use in our business. But so we've just done an annual survey in terms of being able to sort of measure over a period of time how we're tracking in terms of, obviously for us, we've had a new CEO in a year ago, new strategy, slightly new approach. Has that landed? Are people able to articulate the strategy? Do you do anything formal like that, or is it just very difficult to do across 50 stores?
Ben does that for us. Yeah, they have feedback questionnaire forms and that sort of stuff. How do you think we're doing and that sort of stuff?
Right. Yeah.
So there's definitely the channels. We have a Slack, tech channel, so they communicate via the tills in the shop. Right. So they got a direct. They're forever letting us know that we burnt the bread a bit too much, or so the feedback about our performance of our products and our service is very direct, but also they've started to use them for personal feedback as well. Right. Yeah, all the channels are there. Ben's definitely got a great ear for them.
Yeah. Well, one question I probably should have asked you right near the start is, were you so convinced employee ownership was the right way that you almost discounted everything else?
Yes. Yeah. When I heard about it and learned about it, I have an experience being a trade purchaser and dabbling with private equity. I knew the downsides of those too. Yeah. When I looked at an EO transaction, looked at the benefits and the risks, they just seemed the balance was much better. The risks I knew and I could quantify,
Mm.
and I knew the downside, and more than that, I could see the upside of it for everybody. It was quite clear to me that was my preferred method. But even then, it's a transaction, and they last a year, maybe two, in preparation, and it changes as you go through that. For example, we had a valuation, a sort of dummy valuation right at the start to see what the numbers look like.
Mm.
It came back as really positive. I thought, great. But by the time, in those 2 years, we came to our actual valuation at the end, just before the transaction, that number diminished by 30% because Donald Trump was in power. The stock markets were jittery. There was not a lot of business transactions in our sector to use as good evidence. So it's there's lots of moving parts in that transaction. So you've got to stay open-minded. And even then, with a lesser valuation, it was still enough for us that we needed to say yes. But it is quite fluid, and the due diligence digs deep, and you have to dig deep and you think. So risks are everywhere, but I had a good advisor, and we were told about them up front, which really helped.
Yeah.
I think if I bumped into that'd be a trade sale, which often happens in trade sales. You agree a number, and then it comes to transaction, and they start negotiating down from that number, and you're invested, and you spent a lot of money. The fees, aren't cheap. You spend a lot of money on all the fees for prep, and then you're in a weak position as a seller because they can drop their price for whatever reason they find, and all that's done secretly and behind closed doors, which feels really sneaky. And I never liked the idea of that. We're really close, everybody. So I don't want to lie to the people in my business. So this employee-owned business just feels much more honest.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's really helpful. Are there any areas, Nick, that you think we should have covered that we haven't as yet? You've mentioned a couple of times nearly going bust, and you said we might come back to that, but we've sort of covered that a little bit in terms of your acquisition and what have you. But is there anything else of your EO journey you think this podcast really is designed for people who are contemplating the EO journey? Is there anything else that you think you wish you'd have known along the route? You talked about appointing professional advisors. We've talked about communication, transparency of information, but anything missing, do you think, that you would have liked to have known or maybe done differently that you could share by way of helpful information to others? And no issues whatsoever, if not.
I think I had really good advisors. Had I not had
Sounds like it, yeah.
honest and professional advice, I think it might have been a different journey for me.
Sure.
I got to know those. You work really closely with those guys intensely, and it is personal. It's still, even though we have that open culture and everyone's invested, it's as a business owner, it's still your baby. You've lived and died for that. I've had to drive home on a Friday night and tell my wife that we need all our cash savings and cash in all our ISAs because the cash flows got tricky and we can't meet the payroll next month. And then we, there feels like trauma-bound experiences, but I've remortgaged the house to prop my business up. I've almost thrown a towel in, and you get, I think what I learned on that journey was it is personal. You try as a business owner before EOT, even if your team are really involved, it still is personal to you. It's like a child almost. And it's really, I know business owners that don't have that personal connection to their business. I don't know how they do it because I am personally involved and I care about the people that I employ and I care about all my customers and I know lots of those people personally. So it is really personal. And I think for people contemplating an employee-owned business, if you are that type of business owner, it is personal. I think that's where the EOT really came into its own. It really felt the right thing to do, and it felt a nice thing to do, and it ticks a lot of those the emotional components of the transaction.
what you've just said just so resonates with me in terms of, I just think of the times William and I, who started the business back in 2001, were in early in the morning at 6 o'clock sorting cleaning contracts out. And you think of we had our houses on the line, we did directors' guarantees, we did all of that, and I just, certainly in 2019, when we were looking at succession, we were probably getting an offer a month from all the big firms. Right. Yet I'd only really seen value destruction in financial services rather than value creation. And I just thought, when I first started looking at employee ownership, I just thought this is the perfect solution in terms of legacy and for everything we've built, wanting to perpetuate that rather than see, I might have got more as I say, there was 20 owners, we might have got more by selling, but actually, a lot of what we'd built and really sweated for over 25 years would have been destroyed. So really identify with what you've just said there.
And you've got to see those people, even after any transaction, still going to bump. I live a quarter of a mile from my shop. Yeah. And when I'm on my high street, I'll still see the people that work in there. And every time I walk down that street, I bump into 20 customers. And if I had done something else that wasn't favourable for the staff, it's difficult to look those people in the face, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So just a couple of quick fire questions towards the end of the podcast. So, and I'm going to add one in, an easy one for you as a fourth, but finish the sentence. Employee ownership is
a nice way to thank your team for helping build your business.
Amazing. My biggest EO surprise was?
It was actually enjoyable. Trading sales aren't normally enjoyable, and it was. When I look back at it now, I enjoyed the process.
One book every aspiring owner should read. That doesn't have to be an employee ownership book, but have you, on your journey, read any book that you've just thought, oh my goodness, that was really inspirational or helpful, either in the context of Parsons Bakery or more generally?
I've read lots of business books. The one that sticks in my mind isn't a business book, but it's Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain, who was a New York chef, had a lot of personal troubles in his life. And it's a story about endurance and survival through difficult times. And he went on to write this book, which then became like a global bestseller, which then led to a TV show he did. And it was just a story. At the time, I was going through a really difficult business time. And it's just nice to know other people go through really difficult times, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. You've just got to back yourself and stay with it.
Yeah. I'll put that in the show notes. Thanks for sharing that. One book that came to my mind when you were talking about Ben noticing the smudge on the glass as part of the conversation was Unreasonable Hospitality. Have you seen that book?
No.
Will Gadara. I'll send you a copy. We have loads of copies. It became a book that I encouraged all the team here to read. But basically, it's the story of a Michelin star restaurant in New York, 11 Madison Park, and how they go along to an awards ceremony. I think my recollection is they come 50th or something, which is pretty good, be 50th best restaurant in the world, but they wanted to win it. And they recognized that they weren't going to win it on the back of their food. They were going to win it off the back of the experience. And they went to phenomenal lengths to do that, and eventually then did win the best restaurant in the world award. But it talks in the book about even things like they recognized that the temperature in the restaurant changed throughout the evening, or the humidity. So the barista changed the coffee grind slightly to make sure that the first cup and the last cup on a night was exactly the same. And it's, but it's a wonderful story for a leadership team like yours, where it's like, let's sweat the small stuff and really focus on what's important in terms of when a customer comes into a Parsons Bakery shop, what does it need to look like? And it is that just those little final details. Yeah. One final few questions to ask, and we call this the CEO confessional. So you have a choice here. A moment of honesty. So that could be a decision you regret, a moment of self-doubt. That's a moment of honesty. Next one, an unfiltered story. So that could be difficult setback in your business. You've already very candidly shared a couple of those, or a secret struggle. That could be imposter syndrome, balancing work and life. So moment of honesty, an unfiltered story, or a secret struggle. Anything spring to mind, Nick?
I'll go with the honesty, I think. So I think it's good to talk about your failures as well as your successes.
Yeah.
I've had lots of them. But in 2008, our bankers rang up and said, we want our money back. There's a financial crisis. We don't like your sector. We're overexposed. I think I owed them 1.2 million at the time. We want it back. And I said, I haven't got it. And they said, well, what have you done with it? I said, well, we're opening shops and we've got new plant and equipment, new vans. And then they reminded me that they had a floating charge over all the assets in the business and my home, like you. My home was on the line. I was pretty cheesed off, to say the least. We'd done nothing wrong. Repayments were on schedule. And they kind of forced me to sell a chunk of the business to the private equity guys, which instantly led to a culture clash. And I ended up our performance went down. We were really up against it. And I ended up remortgaging my home. I already had to tell my wife and my two children that we might have to sell the home, or the bank might want the home. And, my wife very kindly said, well, let's just remortgage, just give them the money, get those guys out. At least we got a fighting chance for it. And I had 3 or 4 similar big moments in the business development that when I really came up against it, where you just think it's probably easier to throw the towel in. But in the back of my mind was all those staff jobs, and they've all got their mortgages to pay. So I went through a huge amount of personal pain at those times. But I learned 2 things. One was that if you back yourself, when you're in a difficult situation, if you really back yourself, you'll be amazed at what you can do. You can perform much better than you ever imagined you can when you're really up against it. So number 1 was to back yourself. And number 2 was to pick a good person to marry. Because if your partner or your wife has got your back, it's going to make your life much easier. And Nicola was really good and had my back. And I think personal relationships are just worth everything.
Brilliant. That's a lovely way to end the podcast, Nick. Thanks so much. You've been so honest. I've really enjoyed our conversations. It's like, I think we've done like 1 hour, 25 minutes, but the time's whizzed by, and you've been so thoughtful in the way you've described the process you've been through, and explaining the importance to you of making sure that you could walk over the road and still say hi to your customers, which I think is, you wouldn't have been able to do that had you sold out to the highest bidder. So now there's some really lovely stories woven into our podcast today that I think will be massively helpful for those listening. So really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Good.